Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the, 44th season of the Forum. We tried to do some history to see if it really was 44, and it's somewhere between 38 and 52. The math geniuses on our committee said 44 is a good number, so that's what we're going with. I think we have a great group of presenters coming up for the season, and I want to talk briefly about how it all happens. We don't need an organization chart. There's a Forum committee. And the Forum committee, you'll see the names up here, begins working when all of you are either hunkering down for winter or heading south. We begin to identify prospects that would be interesting, and then we begin going after them. And the job really isn't finished sometimes until the day before the speaker's supposed to be here. So it's a great group, and we do this on a purely voluntary basis because it's obvious after 44 years that the island likes it and the support is fantastic. Now, we have some great speakers. The first one tonight, I think you're going to all be very excited about. He was brought to us by Glad Jones. Glad knows him. He's a friend of his and worked together. And I'd like to bring our friend and neighbor Glad Jones up to introduce him.
Oh, happy summer. Great to see everybody. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce you to John Bel and Donna Edwards. Donna, I know you're here somewhere. Would you please stand up and say hello and everybody give you a nice Islesboro welcome. Donna herself has been an incredible public servant in Louisiana, dedicating her life to public education and teaching for decades, and was instrumental in her local parish and many, many, many children's lives. She married, after starting to date when she was about 14 years old, a fellow by the name of John Bel Edwards. They have had a wonderful life together, sharing 3 children, 2 grandchildren who are adorable, and who, all of whom, in some form, will be here in Maine in September. So they have really, over the last couple of years, have become and are becoming a part of our community, which is just a joy for Amanda and I. And I know for many of you, and thank you for being so nice to them. It's my pleasure to introduce Governor Edwards, and I had the good fortune of Donna sharing with me a recent application for national award at West Point that was written about John Bel. I think most of you know that John Bel was governor of the state of Louisiana for 8 years until he was term limited in 2024. He's a Democrat. That doesn't typically run in the same sentence, a Democratic governor in the state of Louisiana. I was in Maine in 2014 when he called me with the good news that he was going to run for governor. And I said, "You're crazy. It's not going to work." And it did work. And not only did it work, but it overwhelmingly worked. Let me just run through this. Governor Edwards' service demonstrates a dedication to the nation characterized by principled leadership, bipartisan accomplishment, and steadfast commitment to the common good. His military service began with 8 years as an Army infantry officer from 1988 to 1996, earning qualifications as a senior parachutist, jump master, air assault, and a ranger. His assignments included leadership positions in the 25th Infantry Division of Schofield Barracks, Hawaii, and the 82nd Airborne Division of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where he commanded a rifle company in the storied 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. These early years instilled in him the leadership values and principles that would define his career in public service. Governor Edwards continued his devotion to duty through his role in the Louisiana House of Representatives from 2008 to 2015, where he chaired the Special Committee on Military Affairs and served as House Minority Leader from 2010 to 2015. As chair of the Special Committee on Military and Veteran Affairs in Louisiana, he championed legislation supporting service members and their families. As the 56th governor of Louisiana from January 2016 through January 2024, he had a state with a $30 billion annual budget and managed that budget quite well. During his tenure, As governor, he led Louisiana through 50 state emergencies and 23 federal disaster declarations, including 2 of the strongest hurricanes to ever hit Louisiana. As governor, in 2016, he inherited a state general fund deficit exceeding $2 billion and left office with a balanced budget, the largest investments in education, transportation, coastal restoration, and health care in Louisiana's history, plus a $300 million surplus and more than $3.2 billion in state savings accounts. Again, he's a Democrat. This fiscal turnaround required incredibly difficult decisions, bipartisan negotiations, steadfast commitment to responsible governance. Under his leadership, at the time that he ended his office, Louisiana achieved the lowest unemployment rate ever measured, 3.3% in August of 2023, as well as the highest per capita income and largest gross domestic product ever in Louisiana. It's my pleasure to introduce to you my friend, John Bel Edwards.
Well, thank you, Glad, for that introduction. I had no idea he was going to tell you all that. I think we'll just go straight to questions. No, it's a joy to be here with you all tonight, and I want to thank everyone involved with the forum for the invitation to speak. And Bruce, thank you very much for being first and telling everybody that this was just going to be an outstanding event. No pressure on me at all. Don and I are very happy to be back in Islesboro. Over the last 10 years, we've had the great fortune to be here, I think, 8 times. And I'm only here for the weekend, this weekend, but we're going to come back in September. And we love it up here because of the natural beauty, but also the beautiful people that we've met. And so many of those people are here tonight. So thank all of you for coming out. And I do intend to speak relatively briefly from a high altitude, looking at 8 years as governor, but introduce a few different challenges and topics, and hopefully something will be interesting to you, and maybe there'll be a follow-up question about it. I do want to just, at the outset, I talked about the beautiful people here. I happen to be married to a beautiful person, and she was a wonderful first lady for the great state of Louisiana. And she was an elementary music teacher in our local public school. Her distinction there is she taught a Heisman Trophy winner. And she believes it was his music education that was really important for that to happen. And as First Lady, she really took an interest in the children of the state, especially those who were most challenged. And she promoted the foster care program, and in particular, convinced me that regardless of the fiscal note, we should expand the age from 18 to 21 so that kids had a better opportunity to finish school and go to college or community college. Rather than them turning 18, we had no authority to keep them in foster care, and many times they were just discharged and homeless. So she made sure that we did that. And then the other thing that she's been involved in, and she still runs a foundation with other, not necessarily first ladies, but first spouses around the country. And it's about human sex trafficking. And most people have no idea how prevalent that is, how big the problem is. But she's got a foundation that does that work. So I wanted to speak to that at the outset, because the truth is that she's been the better part of my life, the best part of my life since I was 14. And that was certainly true during those 8 years that I was governor. Now, as Glad mentioned, I was governor in Louisiana 2016 to 2024. So to put that in perspective for you all, the first year President Obama was president, then we had 4 years with President Trump, 3 years with President Biden. I had, I'm going to say, the good fortune of being able to personally privately meet with all three of those individuals multiple times, and was able in every instance to speak with them about what was happening in Louisiana and why we needed a little help. Typically, it involved a natural disaster or COVID or something like that. I also want to tell you, because many of you are not familiar with me, but I am shocked at the number of people here who have some connection to Louisiana. I just want y'all to know that, including Angela Hill, who is the face of broadcast TV news in South Louisiana. She is now retired, but she lives in Belfast in the summer, and she's over here. But she was at the biggest TV station in the state of Louisiana forever, and she's here tonight. And I told her I had to very quickly change my presentation because I can't be too loose with it. She's going to know whether I'm telling the truth. But because you're not from Louisiana, I'll just share a little bit of information. I am a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat. I'm a traditional Southern Democrat, very different than many around the country, and quite frankly, you don't see it that much anymore. I am was raised by two parents, a sheriff and a emergency room hospital nurse, and she worked at a charity hospital. And so that explains a lot. We are Catholic, but a heavy emphasis on social justice. And you know, my parents just, and by the way, everybody here, you're free to disagree with everything I say. I get that, and that's what makes this so interesting. But my parents never missed Mass, and they never voted Republican. I mean, just so that's the house that I was raised in, and it really does explain a lot about who I am today. And so I share that with you at the outset, so that if there's something that seems incongruous, you say, well, that must be why, you know, whatever. But it was a good fit for Louisiana, and I sensed that it would be. I had been in the State House of Representatives for 8 years before I became governor. We had, at the outset of those 8 years, a very popular Republican governor who, Bobby Jindal, and quite frankly, very capable, one of the smartest people I've ever met. But his ambition to be president caused him to do things that were not good for our state, and our state caught on, and they were ready for something very different. And I sensed that, and I wanted something very different. And being one of 105 members of the House of Representatives in Louisiana is a wonderful honor, but it doesn't afford you much opportunity to make a real difference, especially when you're in the minority party. So that's why I called GLAD in 2014 and said, GLAD, I'm running for governor, and if I don't win, I'm just going to go home. But we were obviously successful. You know, when you talk about conservative Democrats, liberal Democrats, moderate politicians, whatever, I think labels are often misleading. So because I have positions that are I think commonly thought of as some of them are liberal and some of them are conservative, many of them are moderate. And so no one of those labels actually fits me as a person. And so what I typically try to do is just say, well, rather than asking me that question, just ask me about a particular issue, and I'll just tell you what I think and why. And so that's what I'll try to do tonight. So those two issues in Louisiana for me that were very strong and maybe make it a little different in some places in terms of Democrats and their positions is I was raised as an outdoorsman, avid hunter. I'm a gun owner, and I'm a supporter of the Second Amendment. But there's a good story about that, too, because you can never go far enough to keep the support of that group of people in the country. And then, of course, the way that I was raised, I am pro-life as well. But for me, pro-life isn't limited to the issue of abortion. It's about health care. It's about nutrition. It is about the death penalty. And so I try to be consistent across all of those areas when I say that I'm pro-life, but some of those areas would be very liberal. I mean, the Republicans in Louisiana could not believe that I expanded Medicaid. They couldn't believe I said we shouldn't be killing people. But in any event, I just wanted to share that with you. And then I won't talk about the NRA unless you ask a question, but I'll be happy to talk about the NRA a little bit later. We did have 23 federal disaster declarations while I was governor. That is a lot. I'm very thankful that I had spent some time in the Army because that experience, I think it probably helped across the board as governor, but the experience of going to West Point, of learning leadership, of employing it with soldiers really helped in times of a natural disaster because you have to make decisions very quickly. You've got to communicate them. You may not make a perfect decision, but what I learned was a good decision, timely made, beats the perfect decision that comes too late every time, every single time. And so that was the way we approached the disasters. And in terms of pre-positioning, if a hurricane was coming in, we went big rather than small. It's a whole lot easier, and it takes a little bit of time to send National Guard units home if you've mobilized them. It takes a long time if you didn't mobilize them in advance to get them to where they need to be, get them with their equipment and in their units and out where you need them. So that was our approach. But two of the hurricanes that we had, Laura in southwest Louisiana in 2020, and Ida 2021 was a southeast strike, a path very close to Katrina's path in 2005. Those were actually the two strongest hurricanes ever measured in Louisiana. It wasn't Hurricane Katrina. Now, Hurricane Katrina obviously caused the most damage, but that was because the levee failed. It wasn't the strength of the hurricane. And very thankfully, and this is one of those areas where I can just tell you, government can work. About $15 billion was invested in the greater New Orleans area in a hurricane storm damage risk reduction system between 2005 and when those hurricanes hit in 2020 and 21. And we had almost no damage from Hurricane Ida. In fact, we had no real flood damage at all, which Hurricane Katrina was a flood event more than anything else. But the real challenge from those hurricanes came from the fact that they happened during the very worst part of COVID. And all of our plans for many decades, and we've executed them many times, are for congregate sheltering, which we could not do. And so we ended up, so for example, in Hurricane Laura, and this was the Lake Charles area, for about 3 months we had 20,000 people in non-congregate sheltering. Now the good news is that because of COVID, we didn't have tourists coming to New Orleans. We had a bunch of empty hotel rooms, and we put them in hotels. But then you've got to figure out how you feed them, how you get them health care, how you get them their medicine, and for the young ones, how do you get them in school or some enrichment activity? And that was quite a challenge. But I am so proud of the people of Louisiana, not just who worked for me, but who worked at the parish level and the city level, the churches, the synagogues, the faith-based community. Every single time we needed something, they were stepping up. And they don't have limitations that we often have as government as to how and when you spend money and how you account for it. Those people can just get out and do. And a lot of times we're trying to catch up with them. And so they were always quite inspirational. But that COVID situation was, without a doubt, the hardest thing that I encountered over my 8 years as governor. And I know that just about everybody in this room is a leader of something, a business, a family, a yacht club. You lead something, and you had to make decisions too. And that was really hard. What decisions do you make? When do you make it? How do you communicate it? What are your expectations if someone isn't following those things? It's very, very challenging. And Glad alluded to this. It is quite literally the truth that in March, end of March, early April of 2020, Louisiana had the highest growth rate being measured anywhere in the world. That's according to Johns Hopkins. And that was a direct result of the previous month in February having the largest ever Mardi Gras celebration. And people came in from all over the world not knowing they had the virus, and probably we had some of it circulating anyway. And it got seeded so deeply in our community and in our nursing homes, and it was an extreme challenge. And the worst part of it was that it was a novel coronavirus, meaning new. So the infectious disease control people and the epidemiologists, they could model something based on their education and on a similar but not the same thing. And at the outset, they're telling you what they think you should try to plan for. And I can just tell you, those were sleepless nights because there is no planning for the way that thing was modeling at first, given the growth rate, because you didn't know if any intervention was going to slow that rate of transmission down until after you had tried them. But I can tell you, over the course of a couple of years, every single time we put out restrictions involving social distancing and masking, 14 days after the start date, the positivity rate started going down across the state. So those scientists, those doctors, those professionals, those public health, public servants really were extraordinary. And I want to tell you this too. You might not expect to hear it from me. The White House Coronavirus Task Force, led by Mike Pence, did some really, really good work. Debbie Birx was there. Anthony Fauci was there. Dr. Redfield was there. We were talking to him a couple of times a week. The problem, in my view, is we had a president who wouldn't model the behavior the task force was asking for. And when he spoke about the virus, he didn't speak in terms that they were promoting as well. And that made it extremely challenging, especially as a Democratic governor in a Republican state, when what the president is doing and saying was more important than what his task force was doing and saying. And every major decision that I made was something the task force supported, that they thought we should do. That didn't get as far as you might think in a state like Louisiana. And Donna will tell you that just about every afternoon at 3 o'clock, because we're trying to keep people healthy and out of the hospital and alive, there were folks showing up at the gate and calling me a Nazi and everything else. It unfortunately just sort of goes with the territory. But what I knew then and what I know now, the vast majority of people in Louisiana were well satisfied with the leadership that they were getting out of the governor's office. But well-satisfied people are quiet. Upset people get angry and get loud, right? And so that's what we had to deal with. And so I just share that with you for what that might be worth. I want to tell you the next biggest challenge we had, quite frankly, was the fiscal problems. Glad told you, $30 billion enterprise all in. Over $20 billion of that today is federal money. $10 billion is the state general fund. We had a $2 billion state general fund shortfall. That's 20%. There is no way to absorb that. And be mindful, the day I became governor, the previous 5 years, we had already cut higher education funding more than any other state in the nation, including Kansas. People were talking about Kansas and what they were doing. We actually had gone further than they had. There just weren't cuts to be made that people could live with. But I have a majority Republican legislature. Everyone had just got elected on a pledge to never raise a tax. And I need a 2/3 vote. So those of you who know me, I'm not always right, but I am hard-headed. And we just called special session after special session after special session. I mean, they finally realized I was not going to let them go home until we found some way to raise revenue and not have all of those cuts on our hospitals, on our universities, on our K through 12 systems, and so forth. And we were able to get it done through compromise. It wasn't the way that I wanted, but we ended up primarily through a sales tax increase, and I don't like the sales taxes, but they're regressive. I would have much rather done it on the income tax side, and by the way, one of the reasons we were in deficit was because we'd recently cut income taxes, and I thought there was room to go there. But we compromised, and we found a way through. And this is one of the hopeful things that I want to share with you. It was possible because in my 8 years in the legislature, I had developed personal relationships with people, be they Democrat, Republican, or Independent in the legislature, and it was the personal relationships and the trust that we had in one another that allowed us to sit down and explore possibilities for compromise. That is what, in my estimation, we are not seeing in Washington today. And we're all paying a tremendous price for that. So it can still happen. You just have to be willing to do it. Most importantly, you can't view your adversaries as your enemies. You can't have contempt for people, because if you have contempt for people, you're not interested in what they think. You're not interested in spending time with them. You think it's a waste of time. And so you just have to control those emotions and work through it. And let me tell you, it's hard, because I have my views, and they're strongly held, and I'm hard-headed. But you just have to be able to do those things. And we had leadership in the House and in the Senate that really helped. The fact that the chief person in the state of Louisiana responsible for putting together a budget was Jay Darden, who was a Republican lieutenant governor who had run for governor when I won, and he had been in the state Senate as chair of the Finance Committee, so he was well versed in budgetary issues, fiscal issues. He was speaking for me, and that really, really helped. And so I think it's good to have a government that looks like the people you serve in every way possible. Men, women, black, white, Republicans, Democrats, you name it, because it just comes in. It's going to come in handy, especially if you're if in my case, as Democratic governor with a Republican majority, it just really helps, and it helped us to move the ball further down the field than we would have otherwise. And the governor's office, I'm quite certain, the most diverse in the history of our state. And I am so proud of that. But I'm also even more proud to tell you, and being most diverse, that is objectively true. I'm going to tell you, I believe I had the best administration in the history of the state. And one of the reasons we were the best is because we were diverse. Because there are problems out there that me, being a white male from North Tangipahoa Parish, which that means nothing to almost anybody in here, that I wouldn't even know about the problems, much less could I begin to sketch out possible solutions. And I have absolutely nothing against white men. But if everybody sitting around the table looks like me, there are problems we're never going to diagnose. There are solutions we're never going to consider. And having that diversity makes a tremendous difference. And I know that there's been a big pushback nationally in many states, including in Louisiana now under my successor, on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. I'm going to give you the antonyms of those three words. Homogeneity. Is that what we should aspire to in government? Inequity? Exclusion? There's nothing wrong with DEI initiatives. Now, like any good idea, I suppose in some places they can be carried too far. But I am very proud of the work that we did while I was governor around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I do not apologize to anybody about that work. And I believe it made a big difference. And I think when young people especially see someone who looks like they do at the top level of government, it gives them more confidence, both in the government and in themselves, that that's something that they can do too. And unfortunately, if you believe all DEI efforts are wrong, then when you have the ability, you might come to believe that every person who is black or a woman or Hispanic or gay or whatever, that they couldn't have possibly been the best person for that job. They got that job because of some preference, some DEI initiative, and that is wrong. That is just wrong, and we've seen that. Unfortunately, and I'll speak about it, being a military person, it pains me. We have a Secretary of Defense right now. The first thing he did was fire the black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. If you're black or female and you're trying to get on a promotion list to general officer, good luck. That is sad. That is beyond sad. We're talking about our readiness. We're talking about our national security. And so they took down Jackie Robinson's photo on the walls of the Pentagon because somehow him being the first black Major League Baseball player and having been in the armed forces sent the wrong signal to people who might be walking down the halls of the Pentagon? What are we doing? How is that right? I'm trying to be mindful of my time, by the way. Some of this stuff I had no intention to say, and I just kind of got inspired here. I do want to talk a little bit about the Voting Rights Act because the genesis of the most recent Supreme Court decision came out of Louisiana. As governor, we're a state. 1/3 of our state is black. 1/3 of our voters black. We have 6 congressional districts. After the last census and we did the redistricting, they presented a map to me that had 5 majority white districts and 1 majority black district. And one of the majority white districts was drawn in a ridiculous way. It covered more parishes. It broke more parishes up. It was larger geographically than it needed to be, except that was the only way they could draw it and make sure that they would have 5 majority white districts. I mean, really went out of their way. And so I vetoed that. I said, no, you know what? We got 1/3 of our state is black. There's a better map that when you just put it on the wall, it passes the eye test. You just look at the compact districts and you see how the communities of interest and so forth. Well, I will tell you, there's nothing more political that happens in government than redistricting. So that was one of 350 vetoes that was overridden. There were only 2, though, out of 350, but that was one of them. And then within not many months, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, you've got to draw that second majority black district. And then they came back 2 years later and said, oh, no, we didn't really mean that. You don't have to do that. And by the way, the Voting Rights Act doesn't mean what we've always said it meant since 1965. Because we don't need the Voting Rights Act anymore. We're beyond that. And the best proof of just how wrong that was the speed at which Louisiana and other southern states immediately started taking away majority black districts. And what the Supreme Court told them was, well, it's okay, just don't tell us you're doing it because you're discriminating against people by race. All you got to do is draw the district however you want, just tell us that you're doing it to maximize partisan advantage, and it'll be beyond our review. Well, in the state of Louisiana, where over 90% of black voters vote Democratic, that is a distinction without a difference. And I'm telling you, we have lost 50 years of progress overnight, and they see it happening in the federal government, in the state government, the Supreme Court, the Congress, the president. They see it in all three branches in Louisiana and in many places around the country. Extraordinarily sad from my perspective. But Louisiana had a special role in what we just went through, and I had a front row seat to it, was a participant in parts of it, and I just wanted to share with you my ideas. And again, you may have totally different ideas, and that's fine. That's what makes the world an interesting place. A few other things. We were able to turn the fiscal situation around through a lot of hard work. The first 3 years, the budget was terrible. I mean, it's just painful. We stabilized funding, but we weren't growing our investments anywhere. And I made sure that I presented those budgets to the legislature because I wanted them to know that I believe that the best thing that we could do, as difficult as it was. But ultimately, we were successful. The economy started growing. We started getting, and we always, the revenue forecast that we budgeted to was always the most conservative of three economists. And that way, every single year, we ran not a deficit, we ran a surplus. Because the worst thing you can do is run a deficit during the year and then have a couple of months at the end of your fiscal year to get back into balance, right? And so we employed what a lot of people would think of as very conservative budgeting and expenditure principles, except that the conservative governor before me did it exactly the opposite. So again, I don't know that it's conservative or liberal or moderate or whatever. Some ideas are good and some are not. But that's what we were able to do. The economy really grew because we adopted an all of the above approach to energy, I should say. Always oil and gas in state, and we will be for a long time. But we embraced low carbon, no carbon energy. We made sure that everybody knew that Louisiana was open for investment for that. We have the highest foreign direct investment per capita in the United States of America in Louisiana. That is obviously very helpful. And the economy really started to grow. And so rather than being $2 billion short when I left, we ran another surplus that year with the highest investments ever in things like healthcare and education, transportation. And then we left $3 billion in the bank for my successor. And that's more than 3 times it had ever been left in savings accounts. So very, very proud of that work. And again, that wasn't me. That was a team of people who did it. And that was Republicans in the House and the Senate ultimately who came together and helped us to do those things. The single thing that I'm most proud of, the very first day in office, by executive order, expanded Medicaid in Louisiana. Over 400,000 working poor got access to health care. Most of them had never had it before. And I want you to keep in mind, these are working poor people. If they didn't work, they would have qualified for traditional Medicaid. But they didn't work a job that either paid them enough where they could buy insurance or that offered it as a benefit to employment. So these were the people that were stuck. And we had one of the highest rates of uninsured people in the United States of America. It was a very tough situation. But what I knew was that it was going to be a way to help address that budget problem. Because if someone is uninsured and they go to the hospital, which, by the way, the emergency room is the least effective, most costly way to try to manage disease. But you're going to pay 40 cents on the dollar for that care if they're uninsured, and that money comes from the general fund. We could pay 10 cents on the dollar through the Medicaid program, and it comes from a provider fee because the providers are going to be reimbursed enough that they're willing to put up the money, the state share for that, to make it happen. And as a result, in Louisiana, not a single rural hospital closed. Look at all the other southern states over that time period. So very, very proud of that. But I knew I had to do it because my mother was still alive at the time. And she made her living taking care of the poorest people in Louisiana at the charity hospital system. That's what she did. She worked that emergency room. There was no way. My mom and daddy had a picture of Barack Obama signing the Affordable Care Act. And this is in Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana. They didn't put it in their bedroom. They didn't put it in their bathroom. They put it in their living room. So if you went to see them, you knew exactly what they thought was important. Very quickly, we shed the title of the most incarcerated state in the nation while I was governor. That was hard work. We have always, in Louisiana, incarcerated people for nonviolent crimes at 2 to 3 times the rate of other states with similar crime rates. And we couldn't afford it. Still can't afford it. It just doesn't make sense to do that. I will never believe Louisianans are more sinister, more criminal than others, just innately. That's not true. So what are we doing? So we actually, through a very bipartisan series of reforms in 2017, we attacked that problem. And by the time I left, we were saving $100 million a year that we were investing in reentry programs and in youth crime prevention initiatives. You all will remember all around the country in about 2021, 2022, as a result of COVID, you had an increase in violent crime and in youth crime especially. So my successor went right back to doing what was happening before, although the crime rate started falling in 2023 as it did around the country, and it's been falling ever since. But once again, it was just the same prescription that was offered in Louisiana, and we I'm quite certain have gone back to having the highest incarceration rate in the nation, and that is absolutely nothing to be proud of. The thing that I am most proud of, other than what I've already mentioned, is that in 2019 LSU won the national championship, and as you all know, the governors are directly responsible for that. I mention that because it gives rise to a story that I'm going to tell, and then I'm going to stop and take questions. I don't know how this happens, but in 2019, I'm running for re-election, and the President of the United States has time to personally come to Louisiana, in addition to all the tweeting and everything else that was happening. He came to Louisiana 3 times to campaign against me. And what an awful person I was. I'm a gun-stealing, 3rd trimester abortionist communist. That's what he called me. But it just so happens that the day LSU won the national championship, I'd been inaugurated for my 2nd term, and he came to New Orleans to go to that game. And I went and greeted him as he came into the Superdome, and I let him know how proud I was to be able to welcome him to Louisiana as still the 56th governor of the great state. And he looked at me, and as he can often do, and those of you who've had any chances to meet President Trump, you'll know this is true. One-on-one, he can be a very nice person to talk to. He really can be. When the cameras start rolling, however, it's a different thing. But he looked at me, and I'm so glad I had a witness to say this. He looked at me and he says, "Well, Governor, you beat me." But then he started saying, "But you wouldn't have if that opponent that was running against you knew how to speak, or whatever." But my son was there, and we took that away as a big win. Now, my son was there because my wife decided she had more important things to do. I think she was arranging the cocktail napkins or something up in the suite before the game started, but she was just not going to go see the guy who spoke about me the way the president did. But we were able to win, and we served out that, obviously, that next 4 years, which is when we had COVID. We had the hurricanes and so forth. But what a great privilege it was to be able to serve in Louisiana as governor for 8 years. And the challenges were plenty, but the team that we assembled, the work we were able to do, the relationships that we built with people all over the state and really all over the country, one of the biggest blessings for me and for Donna and for my family. And I haven't said that. We are pretty sure politics out of our system. That's not something that we're likely to do again, but I don't say never. But right now I'm having a lot of fun practicing law at Fishman Haygood in New Orleans. My managing partner is here, and I want him to know I'm sticking with him as long as he'll have me. Jim, I'm having a great time doing that. So I hope that something I said may have caused you to think about a question or something that interests you. I can't imagine what's going on in the world right now or in the U.S. or in the state of Maine that might be on the front of your mind. We just have a war. We've got ICE people all over the country, and we got reflecting pools and ballrooms, and in Maine it's been very quiet. So so with that, and I always say I'm happy to take questions, but you really should reserve that till the end, because until you get the questions, you don't know if you're happy to take them or not. But I'm going to say it, I'm happy to take questions.
I wanted to ask what you think of the SAVE Act that is being proposed federally to protect voters' rights, I guess, and what is that going to do to Louisiana per se?
Well, it wouldn't do much in Louisiana. We have and have had for a long time a voter ID requirement. Now, if you go there without a voter ID, I think you can sign an affidavit or something like that. But and then you may have to come back and prove you are who you were. And by the way, I don't think the voter identification, the photo identification from an ID card, I don't think that's the sticking point here. I think the sticking point is having to prove that you're a U.S. citizen every time that you move and have to re-register. Those documents are not readily available. And then the one thing and it depends on what version of the SAVE Act you're looking at. One would have the federal government, decide that states can't use mail ballots like we have forever. And so that is a 100% non-starter, not just for the Democrats, but I think for many Republicans whose states still use mail ballots. And I will tell you that after the 2020 election in Louisiana for my second term, all of the bills that you saw around the country, they made their way into Louisiana too, and typically they made it to my desk. There was never a credible claim, much less any proof, of any fraud in voting in Louisiana. And so I had a rule. Until somebody could tell me there was a problem with voting, I refused to make it harder to register to vote, to stay registered to vote, to cast your vote, or to have your vote counted. And I vetoed every bill that came across my desk that would have done any of those things. And then people would say, well, I know we haven't proven any fraud, but people believe it, and so to restore confidence. No, if you want people to have confidence, stop lying to them. Stop lying to them. That was more than answered your question, so I apologize. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for that very interesting discussion about your terms in office. Given the fact that you are a Democrat in a Republican state, and given the state of affairs in our country now, I am wondering what advice you might have to the Democrats in the coming up elections.
So you may not have heard that advice for Democrats nationally in the upcoming elections. So I do have some ideas, and one of which is my best guess today is that Democrats will have a very good year. And I think Democrats need to have a good year. I think the country needs for Democrats to have a good year. Because typically it happens in a midterm election. And I know that they're non-consecutive, but this is a second term for Trump. His popularity is historically low. Lots of problems around affordability, a very unpopular war. He seems distracted and doing things that nobody cares about around Washington, D.C. And so I really think it'll be a good year for Democrats. The problem that I have is that it'll be a good year by default, which means the party's not going to do the hard work it should do to make sure that any momentum we get this year is durable. And I'm afraid that we're not going to put forth an affirmative vision for the country about how we're going to make people's lives better, how we're going to make the country more secure, because we can win without doing that. And I'm afraid we're not going to recruit the best candidates because we can win without doing that. And that's a little bit of foreshadowing about a question I think I might get in just a minute.
Yes. So what is the Democratic Party today? We have the progressive wing, getting more and more press, and then others in New York. The centralist Democrats, would probably put you in that category, are largely silent from what I'm hearing. I'm not sensing really a great deal of leadership in Washington. The Democratic National Committee, they're not raising, in fact, anywhere near the kind of money the Republicans are. So who are they?
Yeah, that is an interesting question, and I don't pretend to know. I mean, my observations are for the most part limited to Louisiana. I mean, I have some ideas like you do, and from that perspective, it is very challenging. I think one of the big differences in the Democratic Party, you've always had people who were at the far left of the party, people who were in the middle, and people who were over to the right, and so forth. But now they call themselves different things. You have the Democratic Socialists of America, for example. I don't know if you really looked at their ideas that their ideas weren't represented 20 years ago, but the people representing those ideas didn't use the word socialist in their title. By the way, I thought it was kind of cute the other day. The president unveiled the Trump. What is it for children? The Trump accounts for children. And he barely caught his breath before he started screaming about socialism. So sometimes we just need to look at the ideas and not the labels, and either they make sense or they don't. But I do think that one of the, it's hard to assert control and potentially disaffect, if that's the right word, to turn off people who would otherwise turn out and vote for your candidates. And so I think sometimes the national leadership decides we're just not going to do that because we think we can win this year without having to make those very painful choices and take those painful actions. In the long run, I think it serves us poorly.
I would agree, because I think the issue is not winning this election. We're dealing with longer-term, bigger problems.
Yeah, I mean, look, for me, I remember when President Biden won and we went to all our European allies and we said, America's back and things are going to be normal again and so forth. And are they ever going to believe that again? But they might if there's some, and by the way, I am not, I don't necessarily believe that we can't be a good country and secure and fair and safe and all that sort of stuff if only Democrats are in control. But man, give me a traditional Republican, not what we're seeing. And one of the things that disturbs me most is this "Make America Great" thing. True goodness. I'm sorry. True greatness emanates from goodness. And when I hear him speak, he doesn't come from a place of goodness when he talks about people. He is the most uncharitable person. And it's I don't want that being the example that we're setting for our children. Because if we have a generation of children who grow up and that's what they're seeing every night, they come to believe that that's the way that you're supposed to engage with one another and talk about one another. And so let's be really great and start by being good. I'm sorry, you've been very patient.
Mr. Governor, I'm struck by your statistic that 2/3 of your state's budget came from the federal government. Yet, the folks in your state consistently support a party that has an outright disdain for federal government. And Louisiana doesn't have a monopoly on that. Help us understand that phenomenon, and how would you recommend folks change the mindset to understand that government can do good things?
Well, I mean, that is true. And by the way, the bigger part of every state's budget comes from the federal government. But from poor states so for example, in the state of Louisiana, the biggest part of the budget by far is health care. And within health care, you're talking about the Medicaid program. So that's always the single biggest line item in any state's budget. A huge part of that always from the federal government. And it does so much to support your state. You have a healthier, more productive workforce, so the employers like it. The hospitals stay open because they're being reimbursed better. People actually have health insurance or health care. So you would think it wouldn't be a difficult sell. And quite frankly, it's one of those things that I don't know that I understand it well enough to try to explain it. I think the very worst thing you can do is elect people to office whose premise about government is that it's always bad and can't be made to work. They have no incentive to prove themselves wrong. Think about that. Would you hire somebody to run your business if they didn't believe in your business, whatever it would be? Why do we send them to Washington? Why do we elect them? Because they don't have an incentive to prove themselves wrong. It's the most dispiriting thing. I was in Northeast Louisiana in West Carroll Parish. I'm running for re-election. I had expanded Medicaid. You should have seen the people to come out and have free fried fish with me. And I talked to about 6 couples that night who thanked me profusely for expanding Medicaid and giving them the opportunity to have health care. And then I thinking, oh, this is going to be easy. I'm sure hope I can count on y'all's vote. Do you know what all 6 couples told me? They would, but the president had told them not to. I left there not dispirited because I thought I would lose. I didn't think I would lose, but I'm like, what do you have to do here? I mean, I could go far afield with what I would like to say, and I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to stop there. But I don't know how to explain the very thing you just talked about. But we see it to some degree in every state, but across the South, I mean, it's extreme.
Yes.
There is a general disdain for expertise. You experienced it with the COVID and to the point of vitriol. We see it with vaccines and that sort of thing. What do you think is the etiology, and what do you think we can do about it?
You know, it's kind of hard to understand. So the question is, there's a general disdain for science, for history, for facts, and it's if you've got 100 world-renowned climatologists and 99 of them say that the Earth is warming and it's a problem and human behavior is at least contributing to that, and one says something to the contrary, there are 2 stories to be told, but they're not entitled to equal weight, right? But we're seeing that more and more, and I don't know, but I think, and some of you, and I'm not talking about Lee, but some of you have been a little older than I am, and you've been watching politics for a long time. When I was a kid, we got more of the blue-collar, non-college educated votes, and we were losing, and when I say we, the Democrats, we were losing among those who were the best educated. That has totally flipped. And I don't know what to make of that. It doesn't serve us well. It just doesn't serve us well, because it's hard to get anybody to sacrifice today for the benefit of their great-grandchildren who aren't even born. So if you can give them a reason why they shouldn't pay more for gas, why they shouldn't build an unsightly windmill to turn energy, why solar panels might not be if you can give them any reason, they're liable to go with it. And the overwhelming weight of the scientific community is all on one side with respect to health care. I happen to not be I don't want to say that I don't support the Make America Healthy Again, because there are certain aspects of that I think probably make sense. But so much of the weight of the medical community is behind vaccinations as being safe and effective. And to get out there with someone who's a secretary who is not of that view, how is that helpful? So I don't know. These are crazy times, and I don't have answers for all these questions. I'm as perplexed as you are.
Hi, thanks, Governor. In 2028, if men were not allowed to run for president, who would you support?
No, so, first of all, I want to start the question by letting you know I very proudly voted for Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris. I don't know. The reason I'm stumbling a little bit is I really want our next president to have been a governor. And I'm going to tell you why. First of all, I know him. I like him. As a governor, if you elect someone from the Senate, and by the way, we have good senators and good members of the House and good folks, but no single policy decision comes down to any member of Congress. And if something doesn't happen, they can always say, well, it wasn't me. But if you're a governor, it doesn't happen. There's only one of you. And governors find ways to make things happen. And so with that, if it had to be a woman, and I don't mean that the way it just sounded, because my favorites at the moment happen to be people like Andy Beshear and Josh Shapiro and some others. But Gretchen Whitmer is a really, really good, tough person.
I asked Governor Shapiro that same question, and he also said,
Yeah, she's excellent. She's tough. And y'all remember that conspiracy that they broke up before they could succeed in kidnapping her? She would have kicked their asses. I'm telling you. They would not have known what to do with Gretchen had they managed to get her in their car. I'm just going to tell you. That was not good. That was a terrible plan. And I probably shouldn't use that word. Donna's going to say something to me later. I think that's my time. So, again, thank y'all so much for the opportunity to be here. It's been a lot of fun for me.
Governor, I have an announcement to make. While you were speaking, I was in contact with the Maine Democratic Party. It turns out that your 10 visits to Islesboro established residency, and you have until midnight tonight to put your name in. Well, great. We really appreciate you coming and your very candid thoughts. You obviously had a friendly audience here, but I think in part because of how well you speak to all of us as equals and not enemies. So we really appreciate it. Well, that's the first speaker of the first forum. We're going to have more. Next week is going to be Pamela, and she's going to talk about food insecurity and food abundance. This is an issue that affects us nationally, regionally, and even on islands. And again, another great group of speakers coming up after that. We do exist because of your support. Peter Rothschild, our treasurer, will have the silver chalice here, and any contribution you could make would be appreciated. Thanks very much. We'll see you next Sunday.